Today, we're going to talk about a man who, for all intents and purposes, lived two completely different lives. By day, he was a French-trained biologist, a man of science, of hard facts. But in the quiet moments of a life turned upside down by war, he found his real voice in an ancient, beautiful art form. And his whole story really starts with just one line of poetry.
From southern China, again, to the southern seas. Just think about that for a second. In one short line, this man, Li Guochang, captured a whole lifetime of being uprooted. It's not just a location, it's a feeling, a sigh of exhaustion, a map of exile that traces his journey farther and farther away from a home he knew he'd never see again.
And look, let's be clear, this wasn't just some casual side hobby for him. Li Guochang was a serious, brilliant academic. We're talking about a distinguished biologist with a PhD from France. He was a professor at some of the best universities in China, like Central University in Nanyang. He was deep in the world of scientific research.
So that's the big question, right? What makes a man of logic, a man who spends his days looking through microscopes, suddenly pick up an ink brush and start writing in a poetic style that was already centuries old? What was going on there?
Well, the answer, in his own words, came down to the absolute chaos of his era. First, the brutal Sino-Japanese War, then the Chinese Civil War. I mean, these events just ripped his country and his life to shreds. He was forced to run. And in that lonely state of displacement, he found his way back to poetry. It was how he could cope, how he could connect, and really, how he could survive.
To really get a handle on his journey, it helps to just see his life laid out. It was a life defined by constant motion, a string of departures and arrivals that took him across whole continents.
This timeline really tells the whole story, doesn't it? For almost 30 years, you see this steady, impressive climb of an academic career in China. But then, 1949 happens, and the whole story just breaks apart. He flees to Hong Kong, then moves to Singapore, and finally settles in Japan. He becomes a permanent member of the Chinese diaspora.
But for Li and so many others of his generation, poetry wasn't just about expressing feelings. It was a powerful, practical tool. You could almost think of it as a kind of social technology.
The idea has a name, Shi Yong, which basically translates to poetry use, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the idea that a poem isn't just art, it's a tool. You can use it to build a community, to send a coded message, or to keep a culture alive. It's poetry with a job to do.
And this is an old idea. It goes all the way back to Confucius, who laid out these 4 key functions. You can use poetry to inspire people, to observe the world around you, to connect a group of people together, and this one's really important, to critique what's going on without shouting it from the rooftops.
Okay, here's a perfect example of this in action. While Li was in Hong Kong, a friend sent him a poem. Now, it references this ancient symbol that basically means things have to get really bad before they can get better. A very subtle way of saying, I hope the current government falls. Li's response doesn't mention politics at all, but it says everything. We respond with the same voice in wind and rain. It's a secret handshake, a coded message of solidarity.
And this whole practice of poetry use became absolutely essential to Li's life when he moved to his next home, Singapore. This city quickly became the new center of his entire world.
So, in 1955, he gets this incredible offer to teach at the brand new Nanyang University. You have to understand, for the scattered Chinese communities in Southeast Asia, this place was a huge deal. It was a symbol of cultural survival, a place where they could preserve their heritage.
And it was there, in 1958, that Li co-founded the Xinsheng Poetry Society. This was way more than just a club. It became this vital hub for poets who had been displaced from their homes all across the region. Here, they could connect, share their work, and feel like they belonged. This was that connect function of poetry in real, powerful action.
But Singapore wasn't some simple paradise. The university quickly ran into trouble with the government, which was pretty suspicious of it. Police started coming onto campus, arresting students. So what do a bunch of poets do in a situation like that?
Well, first, a colleague sent Li this poem, and it is a masterclass in gentle warning. He calls the students petals on water, fragile and scattered. He calls Li the spring wind and asks why he's getting so worked up about it. He's basically saying, in the most elegant way possible, stay out of this, it's not your fight.
But Li was having none of it. His response was sharp and defiant. He used the formal, classical structure of poetry to write this absolutely blistering line about seeing cavalry stationed in the lecture hall. He was turning poetry into a weapon, accusing the government, right there in verse, of turning a university into an army camp. And then he delivered this final powerful blow. He pledges to do nothing, to go on a kind of poetic strike until the army leaves campus. He's saying he'll just bear silent witness to it all. This isn't just a poem anymore, it's a public act of non-cooperation. Now you might think his story would kind of wind down after he retired, but actually his influence only got bigger, all thanks to a network held together entirely by ink, paper, and postage stamps.
When he retired and moved to Japan in 1968, he was physically cut off from that whole community he'd built in Southeast Asia. But his social life just shifted into the mail. He started this massive correspondence, exchanging poems with friends all over the world.
I mean, the sheer scale of this pre-internet social network is just incredible. It stretched from Singapore and Malaysia to Thailand, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, even the United States. He literally wove a global community together with verse. And if you want proof of how powerful that network was, get this. The manuscript for his second book of poetry, it got lost. But he didn't panic. He just wrote to all his friends, and they sent back the poems he had mailed them over the years. His life's work was literally saved by the community he had built.
So, here's the bottom line. For Li Guochang and a whole generation of people like him, classical poetry wasn't some dusty old art form. It was a living, breathing technology. It was the tool they used to stay connected, to keep their culture alive in new places, and, when they had to speak truth to power.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? They used the tech of their day, ink and paper, to build these incredibly strong communities across huge distances. What are the tools that we're using today to fill that same fundamental need for connection? And as we trade their slow, thoughtful, coded art for our instant, global, digital world, what do you think might be getting lost in the translation?